Hi, my name's Famida Rahman. I'm with Tiffin Valley CIC South Asian Food Heritage Project. The date is the 29th of March 2022 and the time is 2:50 p.m. And I'm with Indira Nanda, who is our participant for the day. Thank you for being here. So do you mind if I just go straight into questions?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay. So firstly, were you born in the UK?
No, I wasn't. I was born in Kenya, Nairobi. My parents emigrated to Nairobi back in the 1930s, and then we all grew up there, were born there. And we came here in dribs and drabs from 1960s. We're a big family, so we came 2 at a time or 4 at a time. And I came here in 1972. So I was about 11. Pretty strange because it was a total difference from the climate, culture that I grew up in Kenya to here, because in Kenya there was a very large Asian or Indian community, an Asian community, and you didn't feel like it wasn't your home. It was like everything was there. You grew up in that. And then we came to UK, and it's like being like a plant being taken out from its pod and just planted somewhere in a snowy area with a desolate place. So it's quite interesting in that we had 1 week to climatize and then had to get into school and sort myself out, basically.
So where did you, when you first came to England, where did you come?
We came to East London, Newham, and we stayed in Forest Gate, opposite West Ham Park. Beautiful place to stay because you could get up and see the park in rented accommodation. And that was an experience in itself, because at that time there were lots of places where if it was a big house, there'd be more than one set of tenants there. So there was us, another set of tenants, a family, and the landlord. And you had to schedule your cooking time with the other tenant or with the landlord. So you couldn't just walk into the kitchen and think, I want to cook this, I want to eat this. You couldn't do that. You had to schedule a time so you didn't kind of get in other people's way and stuff. So that was one of the many things we had to learn yeah.
And where were the other tenants from? Like,
they were all Indians, but I think the difference comes that the landlord was from India. We were from Africa. The other tenants were from India. And even though we're Indians, we're very different. Their behavior was very different from ours. And that was something that we as children weren't aware of, because I suppose when you grow up in another country, you have that biculture. We had the African heritage, we had the British heritage, and then we had the Indian heritage, and we spoke, our Gujarati was spoken with English in it, English words and Swahili words, which we didn't realize till much later in our life, that when we came here and then we went to India for the first time, when we were adults, that we realized that some of the words that people in India couldn't understand, and we thought, but we're speaking your language, why don't you understand? And this is when we found out much later that we were trilingual. Our food, even in Africa, had a mixture of African foods as well as Indian foods, which when we came here thought was Indian food. And then it was a self-discovery when we came here of things that we thought we were, we weren't. Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about, so we'll start in like Africa. What sort of things were you used to eating when you lived
So
there?
when we grew up in Kenya, we had a absolute pure vegan diet, which is now called the vegan diet. We didn't have any cheese. We did have dairy, but the terminology and the reference points for dairy was very different from what is considered now, because now it's mass produced with lots of chemicals and all that kind of stuff. Whereas in Africa, it was still quite homeland of small farms where you got your milk and your dairy products from. Yogurt was made at home. Milk we got from a small farm. The guy delivered. He worked in an office, so he was a farmer, his family, big family, African, and he would come at 6 o'clock in the morning, fresh milk. You could still, it was still hot, it was freshly milked. He would bring that and he would have breakfast with us, and then he would go to office. And then the following day he'd pick up the empty containers. So we were, in a way, without knowing, we were already supporting an organic community, because the vegetables would be fresh. The women from farms would walk several miles and would bring vegetables, and there'd be like 10 women with their children and fresh vegetables from the farm. Everybody from the neighborhood would buy from them all the vegetables. So they would go home, empty baskets, and have earned some money. Their kids will be fed by the people who bought their vegetables. So it was a very kind of interactive community, although you didn't realize it because it's what you grew up with. So everything was fresh. All the vegetables were fresh. All the grains were like bought in small amounts, and it would be fresh. And that's the kind of upbringing we had, pure vegan. And then that was changed when we came here. But it was Gujarati vegan food, Ayurvedic food as well, which at the time there wasn't so much talk about Ayurveda food. But when we look back, you wouldn't eat certain foods in the evening, like you wouldn't eat onions at night. You wouldn't mix onions and milk at night, because if you burped, it would create certain type of acid, and which may give you rashes, for example. You wouldn't mix fish and milk together, although we didn't eat fish. But you know, these were the kind of rules we were told or informed about. So there was a lot of all of that knowledge, unwritten knowledge passed on orally, which we followed, and only came to understand it fully when I studied it, when I came here and did my training, yeah, you know, yoga and stuff, yeah.
Okay. So are there any particular dishes that you remember from that time of your life?
So going back to all of that, my mother was a great cook. I think all mothers are generally, who loved feeding people. And I suppose the best ones we had was aubergines, stuffed aubergines with potatoes, simple food with dal and chapatis and rice. And that would be the favorite food of mine at that time, I think, because you know, you give me that and I'd be quite happy to eat that for a few days. And of course the vegetables, because I love green vegetables and eating fresh vegetables. So the taste was very different. Every day would be different vegetable we'd eat, because you know I've got we're 8 siblings and we all lived together, and there was a certain method, you know, that everybody came home in Africa and sat down. There was a big kitchen. You'd get your little platform, a wooden platform to sit on. You'd sit in a round circle. And my mom, my sister-in-law, everybody would give us our plates. We'd get our plates and we would be given our food there. We'd eat together. And then we'd go and wash up, and then everybody else would eat as well. So it was a very family-orientated, communal living. And if any of the neighbors, because we lived in a 5-story building, cooked something different, they would share it with you as well. And then of course there were the festivals as well, which everybody participated in and helped each other, yeah.
Okay, so who in your house was the main cook?
My mother was the main cook, yeah. And then my sister-in-laws and everybody else kind of helped out.
Did she enjoy cooking?
She loved cooking. She would never get out of kitchen. You know, you would ask her to make and she'd be there making. My father was a very good cook, so there would be this kind of little rivalry going on about certain foods they would cook. And my mother said, well, this is not how you do it, but he said, let me do this. So, and it was quite interesting to see, you know, a male cook as well, and they would cook together sometimes. And during Diwali, they would cook together, and he'd make some sweets and she'd make some and stuff like that, yeah.
So did they normally cook different things, or?
My dad preferred cooking sweet stuff during Diwali. And she was like the general cook who cooked everything, and she was very good at it, yeah.
So in terms of Diwali, is there a particular food that you remember?
For me, it was something called gugra. So they're made out of semolina. So semolina is roasted with nuts and ghee and everything, and then you make a pastry. You roll it up, and it's like a curved like momos, curved, and then you twirl the ends and deep fry them. Once they're deep fried, you leave them to cool down, and when you eat them, you kind of eat the crust, and they'll be kind of crunchy semolina. That was my favorite, and still remains my favorite. But nowadays, it's very labor consuming. People don't make it at home, so we buy them ready-made, but it doesn't stay. It's not the same because there's a lot of. It takes at least a few hours to cook, to prepare and cook and fry and everything, and we don't eat as much, so it kind of seems it's better just to buy now and eat it. Yeah.
Okay. So, sort of moving on from Kenya, when you came to the UK, was there anything you noticed in terms of like differences in food? Or?
Very different, because first of all, there were only 2 Indian shops in Newham at that time, one on Upton Lane and one on Pleasant Road. So if you wanted to get your vegetables, you had to go on a certain day and get it, middle of the week. If you wanted to get your flour, chapati flour and any other flour, you could only get it from these 2 shops. And if they ran out, that was it basically. So what people used to do was buy lots of frozen foods like peas, mixed vegetables, cauliflower, cabbage. And most of the time, people lived on potatoes, cauliflower, peas, and carrots, because those were the basic vegetables available at that time. And that went on nearly I would say, at least until late 70s. I mean, if you saw a mango somewhere, you'd be like, oh my God, heavenland. There is still one Caribbean shop on Upton Lane. He used to have mangoes, sugarcane, and pineapples. So if you wanted any of those 3 fruits, right, you would go there and buy them, because you'd know for guaranteed that guy, and he's still there. So we would go and buy it from there. But if you wanted pickling mangoes or anything like that, you would have to wait, or you just would not get it. So what my mother started to do, she started buying cooking apples. So my brother introduced her to Cooking Apple, because she used to do her shopping in Queen's Market. And he said to her, go and get Cooking Apple. She found Cooking Apple, and she started using cooking apples as a substitute for mangoes to make chutneys and stuff, which we still do. So, and that's how we kind of substituted our foods, kind of using what we could buy here and trialing it out. And making pickles with carrots more than any other foods, and cabbage and stuff like that, yeah.
Did it ever go really wrong?
I don't know, actually, to be honest, because everything was done in small amounts. So I don't think it went wrong. I think what went wrong was foods didn't cook as quickly as they would, and it was to do with the temperature. And then we realized that the vegetables we were getting here was pre-frozen before it arrived here. So it would be a couple of days old, not as fresh, so that they would taste a bit bland, and we had to put more spices in there. And I think that was the adjustments we had to make. The other was making chapati flour. Usually in Kenya you would bind it with cold water and oil. Here we had to use hot water. We still do, because it would not bind as well, or whatever. I don't know what the difference was, where it was gluten in there or less or more. I don't know what the difference was in the content, but we had to use hot water, and that was different. We started making yogurt at home, but it didn't taste the same. So after a few years, we just gave up in the end and buy yogurt ready-made yogurt from shops, because you don't get the right type of culture. We didn't get bioculture easily then either. So that was another issue as well. So you had to, if you wanted to make yogurt at home, you'd mix it, boil the milk, get the culture, mix it, and then you had to find a hot place to put it in for it to become yogurt. So it would be either be in the oven, inside the oven, or on top of the boiler, because those would be the hottest places to make yogurt. And then it became, if you weren't careful, if the proportions weren't correct, it becomes slimy. Or if it did work and became proper yogurt, then it would only last a couple of days until it became really sour and you wouldn't be able to eat it. So those are the little kind of tricks you had to learn. So the idea was at that time to make smaller amounts so you didn't waste too much and stuff, yeah.
Where did you keep the yogurt in Kenya?
It would be outside because it'd be hot. So once it's done, you'd have a cool corner because we didn't have fridge or anything then. So there would be a cool corner in the kitchen and you'd put it in there and it'd stay. Yeah, yeah.
So with the fusion cooking, was there anything that you'd sort of adapted but it turned out really well, better than the original?
Not really, but what we did do was, fusion was, so baked beans, for example. When we started eating baked beans, it was like, would you really eat this? There's nothing in there apart from ketchup, salt, and sugar and beans. So we would make chutney with garlic and red chili. Right, that red chutney was the staple for any colds, flus you'd have. You'd have it with yogurt, and that would kill whatever you had in winter. But what we started doing was started cooking it with onions, so you'd saute the onions in spices and oil, then you'd put baked beans in there and put more spices in there and that chutney in there and then eat it. So that was another one of the fusion. The other one was we'd get fish and chips every Friday. So any leftover chips following day, you would cook onions, garlic, fresh tomatoes, ketchup. You'd make a sauce, really thick sauce, spicy sauce, and then you'd put the leftover chips in there and cook it. Still is one of the favorite dishes still we eat, at least once a month. So it was things like that we started to introduce. Pasta came much, much later. I think pasta we introduced into our diet maybe in the 80s. It wasn't something we ate in the 70s at all. It was much later we started introducing into our diet. And again, you'd spice it up and eat it like that, yeah. But again, we had to go back to the roots of Ayurveda. We'd still eat and we think, can't eat this at night, so don't eat that at night. And follow those rules quite loosely as well, yeah.
Okay. So when you sort of came to the UK, was it your whole family that came?
We came in bits and pieces. So I had two brothers who arrived in the 60s, then we arrived in the 70s, and then the remaining families arrived in late 70s. Yeah, so it was in kind of groups. We couldn't all live together, come over together, emigrate together, because there was this whole issue of getting visas. We all had British passports, but you still had to obtain visas to come here. And in the 50s and 60s, it was easier to get visas to come to UK, but then it became a bit difficult to get visas and come over. And think about wrapping up your 50 years of living in Kenya. We had to wrap up things slowly and gradually and come over, yeah, and bring everything over as well, yeah.
Okay, so who did you, like you said you lived with tenants, but who in your family did you live with?
So initially when we were renting, it was four of my brothers, my mom and dad and two nieces. But because that house didn't have enough rooms, one of my brothers was married with children, lived in Claremont Road. So we used to eat together, and then they used to go over there and sleep. Then we bought our home in Upton Park, and we all lived together at that time, but then gradually everybody bought their own houses as they got married and had children and moved into their homes. But there's still four of us living on the same street.
Okay.
So there's still that exchange of food and stuff going on, yeah.
Okay, so at that time, who did most of the cooking?
It was my mother, and my brother was a very good cook as well, and also my sisters-in-law, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your sister-in-laws, were they also Indian?
Yeah, they're all Indian, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so did they eat like similar types of food and stuff?
Yeah, yeah. We were all vegans, and a lot of them still are vegans. But you know, second generation, we're not vegans. We're vegetarians or not. Depends, yeah.
Okay.
But there was never any kind of pressure on us to be vegetarians or vegans. It was just something my parents followed, and that's what we were introduced to. But we had a lot of freedom to try out food if we wanted to. We were never kind of said or informed that you can't eat or do this, you know. Just go and experiment and eat, and if you like it, eat it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And can you tell me a bit about, so you said you'd all like, it was like a community and you lived 4 families in the same street. Can you tell me a bit about the sort of culture around that? And
the culture, it's I suppose it's very supportive, because when we came here with less Asians, it was all about being together and supporting each other in any way you could. And what was great, I think, for my nieces and nephews was that support system, because they grew up with their parents, uncles and aunts, and they would come home from school and they could go into any house and ask for food. It would not be a big issue. And they could play with their cousins quite easily, went to school with them. So it was a very kind of close-knit family environment. And also at that time, going back to food, when we bought that house, Tory government was in power, and there were lots of strikes. There was strike, electricity board and the gas board were on strike. So they would switch off electricity and gas at certain times of the days. So you wouldn't have any light, electricity or anything. In winter it was really difficult. Luckily for us, in our house we had a fireplace. We still haven't taken that out. So we used to cook potatoes in there. So when we came home from school, we would have tea ready in a flask, and my parents would have potatoes in the fireplace in the coal, so we would have something to eat. So we weren't hungry when we came from school. And that kind of morphed into other kind of fusion foods, because this just brought a memory back, in that we would have chapatis left over, and what they would do is at 4 o'clock, instead of going to chicken shop, which a lot of kids nowadays do stop over, is we would go home, we would get a hot drink, milk or tea or whatever was there, Horlicks, and the chapatis, what they would do is put ketchup on there, some vegetables like sweet corn, peas and onions, and whatever curry was left over, put it under the grill and you'd get it. That was our pizza at that time. We didn't know pizza. So that's how we and that was another kind of modified way of using up food rather than wasting it. And we still do that sometimes, you know, if there's lots of chapatis left, that's what we'll do. Put some cheese on it now and eat it, so it becomes like a mini pizza. So those, and you could go into any of the houses and get that. And that was the kind of community, the kind of family environment at that time. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask you a few questions. So you mentioned about sort of your journey with learning about foods. So you mentioned with your yoga you'd sort of learn about nutrition and food. So can you tell me a bit about that and the journey that you went on?
So, so having grown up with that kind of background of Ayurveda already being taught to you when you're growing up, when I started my training as a yoga teacher, it all came together because now I was learning it. You know, it was a theory kind of, before it was just theory, now it was actual learning. And what happened then was I understood the concept of not mixing milk with onions, for example, not eating certain foods at night because it would create acid in your stomach and you wouldn't be able to sleep. And it also taught me that if you eat certain very acidic food at night, you'll get indigestion, and people who get indigestion will dream a lot more, right? So if somebody came to you and said, oh, I dream a lot, and these are useless dreams which I don't remember, but they're disturbing me as well, you go back to their diet and say, well, what do you eat? What time do you eat? And if you sort that food out, then you'd find that people are having better sleep, waking up relaxed. and there's less acid in their stomach, which is causing that disruption. But it also taught me to kind of go back to detoxing more often and really getting rid of, reducing the amount of dairy that we eat, because the dairy that we eat currently has a lot of chain of chemicals in there. So I would never say to anyone, don't eat it. I would say eat it, but reduce the amount you eat and think about when you eat that. Don't eat it after 4 o'clock, for example. You know, eat it before 4 or 6. Like, don't eat lemon after 4 o'clock, or lemon juice or anything like that, because, or sour food, because if you got a tendency of arthritic condition or muscle ache, that will aggravate it, for example. So those are the kind of things that I learned in depth about mixing foods. Like you should try not to mix protein and carbohydrate too much, because that will cause gas in your stomach and flatulence and stuff like that. So it's kind of timing of foods, mixing of foods, and what suits your body as well. It's really important to find out what suits your body, and that changes every 5 years. Your body changes, so you need to keep adapting the type of foods you eat as well, and you have to let go of some of the foods and not eat it at all, or reduce the number of times you eat it in a month, for example, and stuff. Yeah.
So since learning that, are there any sort of practical changes that you've made to your own diet?
Oh yeah, I don't have dinner. We have dinner at 6 o'clock. Don't have any food after that. Have a light breakfast and a light lunch. Have more vegetables, but I can't eat raw vegetables or raw foods. I can't do raw because of my body type. So I need more cooked foods and stuff. Not have too much milk, for example, and definitely not eat before teaching yoga. You know, at least 3 or 4 hours. Because you know your body, your stomach, your digestive system's working, and you can't exercise. So you know, it's kind of stuff like that. Have more lighter foods and keep cheeses and milks and at bay. You know, have it once a month rather than every day, and stuff like that. So, and you know, if you buy a lot of shelf food, then see what you buy and read the labels. You know, really be mindful of what you're eating. Don't go by the traffic light system. Really read the labels, because there's a lot of underlying stuff in foods that you don't know about. Something like, for example, at the moment there's lots of plant-based foods, right? But if you actually look at the labels, this plant-based food have about 100 ingredients in there. There's got to be something in there that doesn't suit you. So think about it, you know, read the labels and eat it and try out small amount and see how it goes. So it's really important to kind of see where the chain of foods is and what's in what you're eating if you buy it off the shelf. Whereas if you cook at home, you know exactly what you're putting in there. And then some spices as well may not be suitable for your body type. So give up those spices or reduce the amount you eat as well. So those are the things I've learned, and I have adopted that in my diet as well. And that does actually help you, because every 5 years your body changes, so make sure you change your food as well. You know, give up some of the stuff, introduce other foods as well, which is better for you as well, your body and mind.
Okay. Is there anything else that you'd sort of like to add?
Not really. I think we've kind of captured the journey as well as I can remember, really. Well, thank you for inviting me.
That's okay.